If you've ever been fired from a job, laid off, or left a company on bad terms, then this video is for you. Today, I'm going to share my experiences and lessons learned to help you along your own journey. Hi, I'm Laura, and I'm here to take your job search from stressful to successful. Now, on this channel, I talk a lot about the good parts of my employment. The fact that I had a nearly 20-year career in HR, I work for some great organizations, I've had bonuses and promotions, all of that. But there is another side to the employment coin. And I don't often talk about it, but I need to. Because often when you do find yourself in a negative type of employment situation, you feel lost, you feel alone, you feel overwhelmed. Well, I'm here to let you know that you are not alone. So many of us have experienced employment lows and know that they do not determine your future. Do not tie your worth or your value to what a company does to your employment because you are not your job. So I just want to start with that before I dive into my own experiences. And I'll just start off with when I was fired. This was early on in my career. I was a recruiting assistant, and my sole job was to screen resumes and pass them along to branch managers. Well, I was only a few weeks into the role, and I noticed I would get back the resumes with feedback on them, such as doesn't fit our demographic or too much experience for this role. It became very apparent that the company had a type, and anybody who did not fit that mold, they weren't hired. This was discriminatory. So I was young and naive and hopeful that things could change. So I went to my boss and I told her that I thought there was some discriminatory practices happening. Well, lo and behold, the next week I was called into her office and my employment was terminated. I remember that day so clearly. I felt a flush come over me, and it took everything I could do to not cry. I didn't know what to do, so I accepted it and I went in my car and I broke down. And I also made a call that day, and that was to my old boss. And it wasn't for a job, it was strictly because she was a mentor of mine and I just wanted her support and guidance. But that's actually what my first lesson is, and that is to keep your contacts warm. Now, I unintentionally did this. Like I said, I simply respected my old boss and my coworkers, so I kept in contact with them. But when I made that call that day, not only did she give me advice and support, but she said, "Hey, we have a job here waiting for you. It's yours if you want it." So I went from fired to hired in the same day simply because I still had connections that I could reach out to. So while I did it unintentionally then, it's something that I recommend that you do intentionally now. And my second lesson from that job is to document, document, document. If something feels off, if something is important enough to you that you want to make sure you have all the details correct, then document it because you want to save your butt. And when you have it in writing, you're going to have a much easier time of proving your case. And the second bump on my career path was a few years later when I worked at a staffing agency. I was one of 5 recruiters, but I was also going to school full-time for HR and marketing. One of the classes I had in HR was about wage and compensation, and I realized that the company I was working for was handling our pay illegally. Essentially, we were at a base salary plus commission, and according to our offer letter, our commission was on top of our base pay, but I noticed that they were deducting our base pay from our commission. And I did what I thought was right. I contacted the Department of Labor and they opened an investigation. And it was found out that they were doing it illegally. But here's the thing. There was only 5 of us recruiters, so the pool of who actually started the investigation was narrowed down. And on top of that, I was the only one with that type of HR knowledge. So it was very apparent that I was the person who had gotten them into trouble. But in reality, they got themselves into trouble. I just pointed it out. Well, I was planning to leave the company anyway because I was graduating and I was moving to a new city, but I had really banked on having them as a reference, but that was just not going to happen. And so I was like, oh no, is this going to jeopardize my future employment? And here are the lessons learned from that. You don't need a reference from your very last position. I had enough references who could speak to both my professional and my personal self that I never even needed to use them. And on top of it, I also realized that they use something called the work number, which is where the company doing the verifications simply calls this number and they verify dates of employment and position held. That's it. So this worry that I had that my bad experience would taint my future experiences was not even valid. So I want you to remember that as well. Just because you have a bad experience at one company doesn't mean that that's going to bleed over into your next position. In fact, I ended up working at a very prestigious law firm as my next position, so it had no bearing at all. And my third career hiccup was when I was laid off. Now, this was later in my career. My husband and I had moved to a new state and we had just bought a house. Like we had just signed those papers. And I was invited out for a fancy lunch, which was completely out of the blue. So just a heads up, if you get a invite to a fancy lunch out of the blue, there might be something going on. But I was told that the department was just being outsourced, that they were having a third party come in and everybody was being let go. While the rationale was not personal, I took it very personal because we had a house, we had bills to pay, and we had just moved to the state. So I didn't really have a strong connection base. And here's my lessons from that situation. One is to always have your resume ready to go. I just had been working in HR for so long that I always made sure to keep it up to date, but it was very helpful because within that same day that I was told I was being let go, I was able to start applying for positions. And because I didn't have connections where I was, it made it a little bit more complicated than if I had been in my old state. So I branched out, which is my second lesson, is I started actually applying through staffing agencies for contract roles, which I had never entertained before, but I was at a position, or I was at a point where I was like, I do need something relatively quickly. And even if it's a stopgap, I'm open to that. Well, that stopgap ended up landing me a permanent position at a Fortune 500 company. And that was the lesson learned, that don't close the door on unconventional employment opportunities because you don't know where they may land you. Out of all of the negative, there was a lot of positive too, because not only did I learn from each of these experiences, but I grew as well. And they each advanced me in my career in ways that I might not have advanced if they didn't happen. So I don't want to be cliche and say, look for the silver lining, but I do want you to realize that when you have negative employment situations, such as being laid off or fired, that I don't want you to tie your value or your worth to that situation. At the time, it may feel as though you are wearing a scarlet letter, which all future employers see and are like, no, we're not going to hire you. That could not be further from the truth. Things happen in life. It's how you frame them. It's what you learn from them. It's the actions you take going forward. Don't let the things in your past determine what your future looks like. And if you would like some insider secrets about the whole hiring process, make sure to check out my video here.